Airspace classifications is one of the most heavily tested topics on the FAA Part 107 knowledge exam. But here's the thing, unlike some of what you'll study for the test, this is one topic that doesn't disappear once you have your certificate. Every time you prep for a professional drone shoot, you're pulling up a sectional chart and asking the same questions. What class of airspace am I flying in? Do I need authorization? And are there any restrictions I need to know about before I put this drone in the air? So today we're going to break it down properly. Every airspace classification you need to know for Part 107, how to identify each one on a sectional chart, altitude limits, and the special use airspace that will catch you off guard if you're not looking for it. We'll wrap up with a quiz section built around the types of questions that actually appear on the exam. If you've seen my sectional charts video, some of this will look familiar. We touched on airspace classifications there as a broader overview. But today we're going much deeper on just this one topic because I really think it deserves its own video. Before we go further, a quick note on altitude, because you're going to hear two terms throughout this video, and it's worth being clear on both up front. MSL is mean sea level. This is what sectional charts use for airspace boundaries. It's a fixed reference point measured from sea level, consistent everywhere regardless of terrain. AGL is above ground level. This is what you're actually flying above, the ground beneath you. If you're standing on a hill that's already 500 feet above sea level and you fly your drone 200 feet up, you're at 200 feet AGL, but 700 feet MSL. The reason this matters for airspace is that chart boundaries are in MSL, but your drone's operational ceiling under Part 107 is 400 feet AGL. Those two numbers are talking about different things, and mixing them up is how people end up in airspace they didn't intend to be in. The FAA divides airspace into 6 classes: A, B, C, D, E, and G. There's no Class F in the United States. Each class has its own rules, its own chart symbology, and its own requirements for drone operations. Let's go through them one by one. Class A airspace begins at 18,000 feet MSL and extends up to 60,000 feet. For drone pilots, this class is straightforward. You will never operate in Class A airspace. Your Part 107 altitude ceiling is 400 feet AGL, which puts you nowhere near 18,000 feet MSL. For the exam, I think the key fact to know is that all operations in Class A require an instrument flight rules clearance. No visual flight rules operations are permitted. You'll see this come up in questions about general airspace requirements. Just remember, Class A, IFR only, 18,000 feet and above. Class B airspace surrounds the nation's busiest airports. The major commercial hubs like JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Atlanta. It exists to protect the extremely high volume of commercial traffic operating in and out of these facilities around the clock. Class B has a distinctive shape that you'll recognize immediately once you've seen it. It looks like an upside-down wedding cake. Multiple layers stacked on top of each other, each extending further from the airport as you go higher. The idea is to create a protected corridor for aircraft on final approach and departure. On a sectional chart, Class B appears as solid blue lines. Each segment is labeled with its floor and ceiling in hundreds of feet MSL. You'll see notations like 80/30, meaning from 3,000 feet MSL up to 8,000 feet MSL in that segment. SFC means the floor starts at the surface. So for the exam, remember solid blue lines, upside down wedding cake shape, ATC authorization required for all operations, including drones. In the real world, if you're shooting anywhere near a major commercial airport, you're almost certainly dealing with Class B. LANC, the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability System, is your primary tool for getting authorization quickly. Class C surrounds airports with moderate commercial traffic, airports that have an operational control tower and radar approach control, but less activity than Class B facilities. On a sectional chart, Class C appears as solid magenta circles, typically 2 rings. The inner ring usually extends from the surface up to 4,000 feet MSL. The outer ring typically runs from 1,200 feet up to 4,000 feet MSL. For the exam, solid magenta lines, 2-ring structure, ATC authorization required. The exam will frequently test your ability to distinguish Class B from Class C chart symbology. Blue lines versus magenta lines, that's the visual cue. Both require authorization, but the charts look different. Class D surrounds smaller airports that have an operational control tower but no radar approach control. These are your regional airports, your smaller municipal airports with regular general aviation and some commercial traffic. On a sectional chart, Class D appears as a dashed blue circle. Note the dashed line, which distinguishes it from Class B's solid blue lines. The ceiling is noted in a box on the chart in hundreds of feet MSL. For the exam, just remember, dashed blue circle, ATC authorization required, but here's the nuance that shows up on tricky exam questions. Class D only exists when the tower is operational. Many Class D airports have part-time towers. When the tower closes, the airspace reverts to Class E or Class G. Always check the airport's tower hours and check NOTAMs before you fly. Class E is the most complex and most misunderstood class in the system, and it's where the exam likes to test you. Class E is essentially a catch-all for controlled airspace that isn't A, B, C, or D. What makes Class E complicated is that it doesn't have a uniform floor. In most areas, Class E begins at 1,200 feet MSL, which puts it well above your 400-foot drone ceiling. So it's not operationally relevant in those locations. But in some areas, the floor drops to 700 feet AGL. And in certain designated areas, it extends all the way to the surface. On a sectional chart, there are two key Class E indicators to know. Faded magenta shading. This indicates Class E airspace with a floor of 700 feet AGL rather than the standard 1,200 feet. You'll see this around airports with instrument approaches. As a drone pilot operating under 400 feet, you're still well below this floor. But knowing it's there tells you something about the airspace environment you're operating in. Dashed magenta circle around an airport. This is the one that catches people. A dashed magenta circle indicates a Class E surface extension, meaning Class E controlled airspace extends all the way to the ground in that area. This is typically around airports with instrument approaches that don't have control towers. So for the exam, remember, dashed magenta equals Class E surface extension. Class E surface extensions are the hidden trap in drone pre-production. You could be standing in a field that looks like middle of nowhere airspace and be inside a Class E surface extension without realizing it. Class G is uncontrolled airspace, the sky below the floor of Class E. In most areas, that means everything from the surface up to 1,200 feet AGL. In some remote areas, it extends higher, but for practical drone operations, the surface to 1,200 feet picture is what matters. For the exam, Class G is uncontrolled airspace. No ATC authorization required for drone operations. Know the floor, the surface, and the typical ceiling of 1,200 feet AGL. Class G is where life is simplest. Everything else requires some form of authorization or awareness check. Knowing the classes in the abstract is one thing. Being able to look at a sectional chart, either on the exam or on your phone before a shoot, and immediately identify what you're looking at is the actual skill. Let's walk through the visual language. The color and line style is your guide. Solid blue lines, that's Class B. Numbers show floor and ceiling in hundreds of feet. SFC means surface. Solid magenta lines, that's Class C. Has the same numbering convention. 2 rings typically. Dashed blue lines, that's Class D. The ceiling is shown in a box on the chart. Dashed, not solid, that's your visual cue. Dashed magenta lines, Class E surface extension. No altitude notation needed because it goes from the surface up. This is the one people confuse with Class D. Remember, dashed blue is Class D. Dashed magenta is Class E surface. Faded magenta shading is Class E floor at 700 feet AGL rather than 1,200 feet. You'll see this bleeding out from airports with instrument approaches. If there's no markings, you're likely in Class G. Confirm with an app or chart, but the absence of blue and magenta lines is itself information. For the exam, you'll be given a sectional chart excerpt and asked to identify airspace classes or determine what authorization is required for a specific location. The questions reward people who have actually looked at charts rather than just memorized definitions. If you haven't spent time with a real sectional chart before your test, I recommend you do that. Skyvector.com has the FAA's full sectional charts available for free. Pull up your local area and practice identifying the symbols until it's automatic. Beyond the standard classification system, the FAA designates certain areas as special use airspace. These are areas where flight activities must be confined, or where limitations are imposed on aircraft not participating in those activities. There are 4 types you need to know for the exam and for real-world operations. Prohibited areas are exactly what they sound like. Airspace where no flight is permitted under any circumstances. These exist over locations of national security concern. The White House, Camp David, certain government and military installations. On a sectional chart, prohibited areas are shown with a blue P followed by a number. P40 is the prohibited area over Camp David, for example. For the exam, no exceptions, no authorization process, no workaround. You see a P on the chart, you don't fly there. Restricted areas contain hazardous activities, artillery firing, missile testing, aerial gunnery, military training exercises. Flight isn't prohibited outright, but it requires permission from the controlling agency listed on the chart. On a sectional chart, restricted areas appear as a blue R followed by a number. For the exam, the key distinction is prohibited versus restricted. Prohibited means never. Restricted means not without authorization from the controlling agency. In the real world, restricted areas are often part-time, tied to military training schedules. An area that's restricted on Tuesday morning may be open Tuesday afternoon. Always check the hours and status before you dismiss a location as unworkable. Military operation areas are used for military flight training, fighter jet maneuvers, aerial combat practice, high-speed operations. When an MOA is active, non-participating IFR aircraft need ATC clearance to enter. VFR aircraft and drone pilots operating under Part 107 are technically allowed to enter, but do so at their own risk. On a sectional chart, MOAs appear in magenta with the name and hours of operation noted. For the exam, just know that MOAs are advisory, not prohibited or restricted. You can legally fly in an inactive MOA. Flying in an active MOA is legal, but inadvisable. You're sharing airspace with aircraft that may be operating at high speeds and unusual altitudes. In the real world, if you're shooting in rural areas, particularly in the western United States, you may find yourself under or near an MOA. Check the hours. If it's active, consider whether that shoot location is worth the risk. TFRs are temporary areas of restricted airspace established for specific situations: presidential movements, major sporting events, disaster response operations, wildfires. Unlike the other special use areas we've covered, TFRs are not shown on sectional charts because they're temporary. They're issued via NOTAM, Notice to Air Missions. If a question asks you how you'd identify a TFR in your area, the answer is checking NOTAMs through the FAA's official system or a NOTAM-aware application. In the real world, TFRs are the thing that will get you in trouble if you're not checking before every single flight. A presidential movement can generate a TFR with very short notice. A wildfire TFR can go up overnight. Flying into a TFR, even unknowingly, carries serious legal consequences, including certificate suspension and potential criminal charges. Apps like Before You Fly and Aloft display active TFRs in a drone pilot-friendly format. Use them for every flight. Before the quiz, let's put everything together. Here's your at-a-glance summary. Class A is 18,000 feet MSL to 60,000 feet MSL. IFR only, not relevant to drone operations. Class B is surface to typically 10,000 feet MSL. Solid blue lines on sectional charts. ATC authorization is required for drones. Class C, surface to typically 4,000 feet MSL. Solid magenta lines. ATC authorization is required. Class D, dashed blue circle. ATC authorization required during tower hours. Reverts when tower closes. Class E, variable floor. Dashed magenta circle for surface extensions. Authorization required. Faded magenta shading for 700-foot AGL floor. Standard floor at 1,200 feet AGL. Class G, surface to typically 1,200 feet AGL. No markings on chart. No authorization required. All right, quiz time. These questions are built around the types of questions that actually appear on the Part 107 knowledge exam. I'll give you the question, give you a few seconds to think about it, and then give you the answer and explain why. Keep score if you want. Question 1. On a sectional chart, what does a dashed magenta circle around an airport indicate? Is it A, Class D airspace, B, Class C airspace, C, Class E surface extension, D, a military operations area? The answer is C, Class E surface extension. A dashed magenta circle means Class E controlled airspace extends to the surface in that area. This is one of the most commonly missed chart symbology questions on the exam. Remember, dashed blue is Class D, dashed magenta is Class E surface. Question 2. You want to fly your drone near a regional airport that has a part-time control tower. The tower closes at 7 p.m. You plan to fly at 7:30 p.m. What class of airspace are you likely operating in? Is it A, Class D, tower hours don't affect the airspace classification? B, Class G, the airspace reverts when the tower closes? C, Class C, all towered airports are Class C? D, Class B, full ATC authorization is always required near airports? The answer is B. When a part-time Class D tower closes, the airspace typically reverts to Class E or Class G. Class D is defined by an operational tower. Question 3. Which of the following requires ATC authorization for drone operations? Is it A, Class G airspace below 400 feet AGL? B, Class E airspace at 1200 feet AGL? C, Class D airspace during tower operating hours? D, a military operations area when inactive? The answer is C. Class D during tower hours requires ATC authorization. Class G requires nothing. Class E at 1200 feet is above your operational ceiling. An inactive MOA is advisory only. Question 4. A drone pilot wants to fly in an area marked with a blue P on a sectional chart. What should the pilot do? A. Contact the controlling agency for authorization. B. Check NOTAMs for current restrictions. C. Do not fly. This is prohibited airspace. Or D. File a flight plan and proceed. The answer is C. Prohibited airspace is prohibited. No authorization process, no agency to contact, no exceptions. Blue P on the chart means you find a different location. In professional practice, you identify these areas during pre-production and simply don't schedule shoots there. Question 5. What is the primary difference between restricted airspace and prohibited airspace? Is it A. Restricted airspace is permanent, prohibited is temporary? B. Restricted airspace may be entered with authorization from the controlling agency. Prohibited may not be entered under any circumstances. C. Prohibited airspace applies only to manned aircraft. D. There is no practical difference for drone pilots under Part 107. The answer is B. Restricted airspace can be entered with authorization. Prohibited cannot. This distinction is reliable exam material and also practically useful. A restricted area near a military base might be flyable on a Saturday when training isn't scheduled, so always check. A prohibited area is never flyable. Question 6. You're planning a drone shoot tomorrow morning. How would you find out if there's a TFR in your area? A. Check the sectional chart for your region. B. Contact your local airport's control tower. C. Check NOTAMs through the FAA system or a NOTAM aware app like Before You Fly or Aloft. D. TFRs are always announced through local news and social media. The answer is C. TFRs are issued as NOTAMs and do not appear on sectional charts. Checking NOTAMs before every flight is a legal requirement under Part 107, not just good practice. So build it into your pre-production checklist. Apps like Before You Fly and Aloft make it easy. They pull NOTAM data and display it in formats that make sense for drone pilots. Question 7. What does faded magenta shading on a sectional chart indicate near an airport? Is it A. Class B airspace extending outward from the airport? B. Class E airspace beginning at 700 feet AGL? C. A military operations area boundary? D. Class G airspace below 1200 feet AGL? The answer is B. Faded magenta shading indicates a Class E floor of 700 feet AGL rather than the standard 1200 feet. This lower floor protects instrument traffic on approach. As a drone pilot, you're operating below this floor, but understanding the symbols helps you read charts accurately and confidently, both on the exam and in the field. That's airspace classification for the FAA Part 107 exam, and for every professional drone shoot you'll ever do. 6 classes of airspace, 4 types of special use airspace, and 7 exam-style quiz questions. If you got all 7 right, I think you're in solid shape on this topic. If a few of them tripped you up, go back to the sections that gave you trouble, particularly the chart symbology section. Being able to look at a sectional chart and immediately identify what you're seeing is the skill that matters, both on test day and on location. If this is helpful, subscribe to our channel. I cover every major Part 107 topic in this format, and there's a lot more coming. And if you have questions about anything we covered today, drop them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer. Good luck on your exam, and I'll see you in the next one.